Those of you who are members of Temple Beth Torah, you already are welcome. But for everyone else who is here who has not yet been welcomed to our community, welcome. We are so glad that you are here to help us to honor those who lost their lives during the Shoah, which is the Hebrew word for the Holocaust, and also to honor those lives as people who lived and not just as numbers, as statistics. When we tell the story of the Shoah, we tell the story of human beings, just like you and I, who deserve to be remembered. And so we're so grateful that you're here to help us do that today. Before we get started, it's my pleasure to invite Reshma Inamdar, who is the president of the Tri-City Interfaith Council, who is our co-sponsor of this program this evening and annually. And so I welcome her this evening.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Tri-City Interfaith Council, which is our co-sponsor of today's remembrance, I thank you for joining us this evening as we honor and remember the 6 million Jews and members of other persecuted groups who lost their lives in systematic, state-sponsored, horrifying, and deliberate acts of cruelty. We honor those who managed to survive and to live to tell of these horrifying atrocities. We honor those people and nations who stood up to this evil and ultimately prevailed. In our current reality, in the face of growing and toxic political division, rising anti-Semitism, authoritarianism, ongoing Islamophobia, homophobia, and general xenophobia, war, civil war, ethnic cleansing, and genocide in various parts of the world, it is even more critical that we take time to remember and reflect on the lessons from the Holocaust. This sad period in history can teach us a lot about both the horrifying extent of human cruelty as well as the depths of human compassion. It can teach us about hubris as well as humility. It teaches us about cowardice and courage. One of the most important lessons, I think, is that silence and more significantly, indifference in the face of injustice can become a form of complicity. So today, let us resolve to stand up together against injustice, racial, ethnic, religious intolerance, and hatred. Let us stand up together for justice, for the rule of law, for civil liberties, for basic human rights, and for our planet as a whole. Let us together be advocates for peace and constructive resolutions for world conflicts. May the most compassionate guide us towards embracing and fulfilling our responsibilities to our planet and to each other. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
We begin with silence, the silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. There are no words to reach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence, the silence of Job, the silence of the 6 million, the silence of memory. Let us remember them as we link our silences.
In a moment, we are going to bring our Torah from Patsov as a processional into our space to become one with us, to be among the rememberers. And it is part of Jewish tradition that when a Torah is paraded around the room, that we rise and that we face the Torah wherever it is in the room. So in a moment, I will open the ark. I will invite those who were a part of coordinating this event this evening to join me in the processional. And I will invite everyone else to please rise. Please be seated. And we are on page 3 for the words of Eli, Eli. Eli, Eli, Shalom, Yigdal Be'olam. Rish Shem Shah Rishru Shemaim Be'olam Twilat Tada. Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand, the sea, the rock, the heavens, the sand, the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the
Finding life on Holocaust trauma. The worst was not the fire or the long mile that blurred the line between living and dying. The worst was the pause and the realization that the worst had not, in fact, been done, but was creeping into all our blank spaces and sweet freedom after, make us victors of circumstance and menders who fight persistent maiming. Let us grab hold of our present and let our existence be for life, above the past and all else. Devin's prayer.
Second Generation, poem by Anne R.Z. Schulman. Even though it's written from a woman's perspective, it resonates with me. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and I never knew my grandparents. It never happened, they say, but I never tasted my Buba's Shabbos of honey braided challah, golden chicken soup, nor prayed for God's blessing standing beside her at candlelight, peace light shone over our faces. I never wore dresses she sewed for the holy days, nor matched my height to hers as I grew. I imagine the warmth of her soft skin cradling and her voice crooning lullabies in Yiddish. It never happened, they say, but I never sat on my grandfather's lap to hear tales of the dense Polish forests, of the sage traveling rabbis who held court in his home, while welcome students quench thirst for his holiness, his wisdom. I imagine soft whiskers as I tickle Zeta's beard and whispered tone of his loving laughter. It never happened, they say. But coming to America, we were still alone and started our new life without them. So what happened to those people? Shadowed, increased sepia photos whose souls reach out to mine. Our tears striped ancient walls of Jerusalem. I imagine aunts, uncles, cousins, dancing horrors at my wedding and playing with my babies who so resemble them, their own. It never happened, they say. But frail father woke screaming that those swastikad still chased him, and maimed mother shed blood tears of guilt, the reality of endless losses. This small child was bewildered. This young girl was frightened. This woman trembles, facing the past.
Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emuna shelema, be'viat HaMashiach, be'viat HaMashiach ani ma'amin. ואף על פי שיתמהמה, עם כל זה אחכה לו. אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין, באמונה שלמה. בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. There's a tale that these are words that a group of Jews sang as they were walking towards their very own deaths. Even as they knew that their life was likely to come to an end, they sang these words together. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Mashiach, and though they tarry, I will wait daily for their coming.
This is the Yom HaShoah prayer. For the sin of silence, for the sin of indifference, for the secret complicity of the neutral, for the closing of borders, for the washing of hands, for the crime of indifference, for the sin of silence, for the closing of borders, for all that was done, for all that was not done. Let there be no forgetfulness before the throne of glory. Let there be remembrance within the human heart, and let there at last be forgiveness when your children, O God, are free and at peace.
for the 6 million and for all who died in the Shoah. Let there be perfect rest for the souls of the 6 million who died as Jews in the flames of the Shoah. Let there be perfect rest for the countless millions who died because of race, religion, or nationality, political affiliation, or sexual orientation. Let there be perfect rest for the souls of the righteous who risked all they had to hide and rescue Jews during the Holocaust. Hold them close to you forever. Seal their souls for everlasting life in the shelter of your presence, for you are their eternal home. And let us say, Amen.
El male rachamim, shochein bamramim, amtse menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashechina, im kedoshim utorim, kezohar harakia mazhirim, et nishmot yakirenu, שהלכו לעולמם, בעל הרחמים יסתירם, בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. בצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר Amen. Together we read, God, full of mercy, who dwells above, give rest in the wings of divine presence amongst the holy, pure, and glorious who shine like the sky, to the souls of our beloveds, for whom there was offered in the memory of their souls. Therefore, the merciful one will protect their souls forever and will merge their soul with eternal life. The everlasting is their heritage, and they shall rest peacefully at their lying place. And let us say, Amen.
Dear God, we are supposed to be created in your image.
But oh, how we have distorted it.
When we recall the beastly acts of people,
we are ashamed to be human.
When we read of the nobility of their victims,
we are proud to be humans.
Teach us, O God, to honor our martyrs.
By being vigilant in defense of people everywhere, and by fighting cruelty, persecution, and hate.
Where there is hatred, may we bring love.
Where there is pain, may we bring healing.
Where there is darkness, may we bring light.
Where there is despair, may we bring hope. We remember all who perished by reciting the mourner's Kaddish, the traditional Jewish prayer said for the dead. This prayer is not a funeral hymn, but an affirmation of God's everlasting presence and dominion, praising God's existence and creative love. We pray also for the survivors whose faith and love enabled them to rebuild in other countries their shattered lives, their destroyed worlds. Joining together, they brought about new life. They raised families in new lands, in defiance of absolute terror and despair, and invincible hope. Exalted by that spirit of life-giving and faith, the Kaddish is prayed. Please rise as we say the mourner's Kaddish together. Yitzgadal v'yitzkadash me rabbah, be'alma divrach hirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala ubizman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Ulalmei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei kudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, to which we say, amen. Please be seated. Let us read together the last poem on the bottom of the page, entitled God, Give Us Strength. As we gather tonight, we pray for courage and for strength. We remember these evils in the past, the innocents tortured, maimed, and murdered. We are almost afraid to make ourselves remember, but we're afraid to forget. We ask for wisdom that we might mourn and not be consumed by hatred, that we might remember and yet not lose hope. We must face evil, and so doing, reaffirm our faith in future good. We cannot erase yesterday's pains, but we can vow that they will not have suffered in vain. Amen. I now invite Sharon Sachs to share with us a little bit about her story and connection to the Torah that we processed this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. After my father, Martin Zell, passed away in 1985, I think, my mother, who worked in the office, began researching, and she was a really voracious reader. And she found out about the Sacred Torah Trust in the Westminster Synagogue in London. She wrote a letter requesting a Torah on loan to come to Temple Beth Torah from Bardiof, which was the town that my father was from. Unfortunately, there were no Torahs from Bardiof. They all perished, and they were not retrieved by the Sacred Scroll Foundation. That foundation found close to 1,200 Torahs that the Nazis had confiscated. But they did offer Temple Beth Torah a sacred scroll from Pasov, Czechoslovakia. And of course, she said yes. And I so vividly remember, and maybe some members remember, that the Torah was brought here in a very large shipping crate. And it arrived, and we had a celebration to welcome the Torah on a Friday evening. It was a truly beautiful event. This Torah has meant a great deal to our synagogue community, but I have to say that it is a beautiful legacy for my family. Every time I see the Torah in the Ark, I think of my parents and my father's family. He was one of two who survived. The rest of his family perished in the Holocaust. And this Torah, although not a kosher Torah, was used for my son Lauren and my daughter Rebecca's bar mitzvahs, bar and bat mitzvahs, and they chanted from the Torah. And last weekend, the legacy continued as we passed down the Torah to our grandson, Avi, who chanted from the Torah. And so it's a beautiful legacy for our congregation and a legacy for our family that I will never forget. Thank you. And with that, want me to introduce the film? Okay. And now we will be showing a wonderful documentary. Rabbi Zoe and I were contacted by Dale Bloomstein and Karen Koblitz over a year ago, I guess, to come to our temple, our synagogue, to be interviewed about our sacred scroll. There are only 7 scrolls in the United States, and we have the only scroll from Pasov in California. So this documentary, and you will hear from Karen and Dale after the documentary. We have a very small part in it, but an important part. And I think you will find it fascinating. So enjoy.
There is a legend that when the Temple of Solomon was destroyed in Jerusalem, stones were taken by angels and used in the old new synagogue in Prague, with the promise that when the temple in Jerusalem is restored, the stones would be returned. Stones, from which we have built our synagogues for 2,000 years, are often the last traces of what once was, standing in defiance against the elements, against fire, against change, against time. Far from the Jewish quarter in Prague, in the many smaller communities that dot the landscape, there has been Jewish worship, most in small, modest gatherings, homes, or prayer rooms. But in some communities, overcoming resistance, oppressive laws, and untold obstacles, a synagogue was built. In Patzov, about 100 kilometers southeast of Prague, one such building remains. Though voices reading the sacred Torah scrolls are no longer heard there, couples are not wed, babies are not named, nor holidays celebrated, the walls still stand. Light pours through windows, windows that have endured the darkest times that Jews have seen, times where no light could be found. But the hope and memory and devotion to those who once lived their lives in the warmth of this light is where our mission begins. This once holy space, its community gone, became a place forgotten. It endured time, rain, decay, and neglect, but it has survived. And now it is poised to be reborn, a bridge to the past and a message for the future. The first Jews arrived in Patzov in the mid-16th century. The regions of Moravia and Bohemia became part of the Habsburg Empire, which expelled Jews from Prague, sending them to smaller cities and towns. For the next 300 years, the ruling dynasties, laws, economic opportunities, and status all seemed to be a constant changing burden for each generation of Jews living there. Throughout this period, while continuing these restrictions, Jewish life endured and continued to develop, even thrive, in the city of Prague. Smaller communities also grew, as many Jews sought refuge away from the larger cities and the centers of power, where the threats to their safety were greater. By the mid-1700s, there were nearly 600 small villages in Moravia and Bohemia, with 2/3 of Jews living outside of Prague. In 1781, there began the slow, uneven, but eventual societal change for Jews. It was the beginning of the emancipation. Strict oppressive laws began to ease, and Jews began to gain rights that other nationalities held. Finally, in 1867, Jews received legal equality. The gradual migration back to the larger cities began. But some of the smaller towns and cities maintained their relatively sizable Jewish population. The city of Potsdam reached its highest Jewish population of just over 200 people in 1880. The exact population and arrival dates in a town or region are often hard to know. Records are vague, often incomplete, or simply lost to time. But there is one date that remains indisputable: the date in which Jewish life in Potsdam came to an end. November 13th, 1942. The transport of nearly 100 people occurred as Jews were ordered to gather at a local school. From there, they were sent to the larger city of Tabor. 3 days later, they would be on a train transport, where they would arrive at the town of Bohushevice nad Ohry, where they would be forced to walk the final 2 miles from the train station, carrying their belongings, to a garrison encampment, Terezin, in German, Theresienstadt. Nearly 100 souls, 31 family names. Most of these family histories remain lost, but thankfully, there are stories to have emerged from the ashes. Families in which the threads of memory continue. In Potsdam, one of these memories can be found in the story of the Lederer family. Father Emil Lederer was a prominent community leader. His daughter, Viera, along with the other Jewish residents of Potsdam, was sent to Terezin. She was scheduled to transfer to Auschwitz with her mother and sister, but a family acquaintance removed her name from the transfer list, thus saving her life. Her mother and sister perished. Viera ultimately was sent to Auschwitz. After a period of time at a forced labor camp, she was sent with thousands of others on a death march to Bergen-Belsen. She and 2 other girls escaped the march and survived. Viera was the only member of her family to survive, and, as miraculously, their family photo album survived, proof of the lives that were lived. Nelly Presma, née Gutmanova, survived Auschwitz and lived in Prague for a short time after the war, and then emigrated to Israel. Nelly returned to Potsdam in 2017 to retrace the steps of her youth as the daughter of Potsdam's last rabbi. She was able to walk through the house that she once called home, a structure that is now also part of the effort to preserve their history. Hanush Bader was on the transport that left Potsdam in 1942, and one of the few who survived. He too went on to Auschwitz and Schwarzheide labor camp, and was deported to the Bergen-Belsen near the end of the war. On the brink of death, the British liberated Bergen-Belsen, and Hanush survived. Yaroslav Lustig was also the only survivor of his family. His wife, son, and entire extended family would die in Auschwitz. His horrific journey took him through a series of labor camps and brought him within hours of death, but he was saved just in time by Russian and Polish liberators. He returned to Potsdam after the war and lived until 1987. Hugo Yockel studied at the University of Vienna in the early 1920s. He would go on to become a teacher of languages and history. Hugo worked at the Hagibor labor camp in Prague from October 1944 and was sent on to Terezín near the war's end. When Hugo died in 1960, per his wishes, he was buried in the Patzov Jewish cemetery along with his family. Leopold Pachner was also on the November transport of 1942. He survived Auschwitz and returned to spend time in a small home outside of Patzov in the years after the war. Leopold was perhaps one of the few survivors to maintain a connection to Patzov after the war. His granddaughter, Zuzana, recalled that a simple walk across the town square would take over an hour because so many of Leopold's friends would stop him to talk. Leopold lived another 20 years, and when he died, he would be the last burial in the Jewish cemetery in Patzov. Few other remnants of Jewish life remain in Patzov, a community that had existed for nearly 500 years. The time and weather-worn stones in the Patzov Jewish cemetery give witness to where life seems to have ended. But there yet remains a bond, a living link to the Jews of Patzov. They take the form of sacred Torah scrolls, Torahs that were carried, read from, and lifted up within the very stone walls of the synagogue by the Jews of Patzov and the other surrounding communities. The story of these scrolls is one of resilience and survival. The nightmare of Nazi occupation took hold after the Munich Agreement in 1938, and practically overnight, Jewish communities were forced from the Sudetenland, the German name for the regions on the western, northern, and southern border of Moravia and Bohemia. By March 15th of 1939, the Nazis would complete their occupation, and the country of Czechoslovakia would cease to exist, replaced by what would be called the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, sealing the fate of the synagogues and their contents from around the country. For many years after the war, it was believed that the Nazis had planned to establish a museum to an extinct race, though over time, researchers have found no direct evidence of this plan, and now consider this idea to be a myth. While it is known that some Nazis held a fascination with and desire to collect Jewish religious items and books that they thought would be of value, it is believed that it was the members of the Jewish community that persuaded Hans Gunther, the SS Sturmbannführer, to allow a dispatch to be sent calling for all Jewish communities' possessions to be shipped to the Jewish Museum in Prague for collection. Items came from over 150 towns from Moravia and Bohemia. The Jewish Museum librarians and curators were given the almost inconceivable task of cataloging this vast treasure, the Judaica of the entire Jewish population of what was Czechoslovakia. Spread over 40 buildings throughout Prague, miraculously, over 200,000 items, including over 1,500 Torah scrolls, survived. Their desperate work continued as the war raged on, hoping that their work would not only save their precious history, but also keep them off the transports. One by one, their names were called for deportation. By October of 1944, all were gone. Sent initially to Terezín, their horrific journey ended in Auschwitz and other death camps. In 1945, in the war's aftermath, some 50 communities attempted to re-establish Jewish life. But following the communist coup in 1948, Jewish worship, as well as other religious practice, was largely restricted and closely monitored. While the Jewish Museum in Prague remained open, the Torah scrolls were moved in 1958 to the abandoned Michle synagogue in the outskirts of Prague. In the early 1960s, an American art dealer living in London was made aware of the scrolls as the communist government was looking to sell them. When brought to the basement of the Michle synagogue and shown hundreds and hundreds of scrolls stacked floor to ceiling, he brought it to the attention of one of his clients in London, Ralph Yablon. Yablon conferred with Rabbi Harold Reinhardt of the Westminster Synagogue and agreed to finance the purchase. A deal with the communist government was reached, and in February of 1964, arriving at the door of the Westminster Synagogue were 1,564 Torah scrolls. Some tattered, some burned, some with hidden notes of despair and pleas for help, some stained with blood. In the years that followed their arrival in London, Potsdam scrolls were sent to synagogues just north of London, across the ocean, and across America. A link to a Jewish community that was gone, now connected to communities that will remember.
And the one thing that I wanted for this very new congregation was a very old Holocaust Torah. And I said something about that, and it turned out that the man sitting next to me knew Rabbi Friedlander and arranged for him to bring the Holocaust Torah here. About 6 months later, he showed up, and it was an incredible moment for all of us. We had done a dedication of the property and all of this, but in many ways, the emotional dedication was that night, and that the drama of having that Torah that was a remnant of a vital Jewish community. Rabbi Friedlander had carried the Torah over, wrapped in brown paper, on his lap. At the point in the service when it was time, we opened the Torah scroll. And it's a very emotional thing. I mean, it was a remnant of a community, and I was so aware of that. And when we took off the paper, it was this beautiful Torah, and it was tied with a simple piece of string and a square knot. And the scribe had trimmed the ends of this. It was just perfectly neat. And it just took my breath away. Still does. I mean, I was really frozen. It was, and that was the dedication of the temple in the most significant way, because we knew we had a future. And now we were rooted in a way that we had never been.
I found my mom's travel diary. She was a prolific writer. And I found a notation from December 19th, 1978, in which she indicated that she and my dad and my brother Paul went to the Westminster Synagogue in order to pick up the Holocaust Torah for the Fairlawn Jewish Center. I remember my brother carrying the Torah through the airport and onto the plane. And my brother said he felt very proud carrying the Torah.
In 2014, or about a year before 2014, a letter was sent to all the synagogues that had the scrolls. They're going to have a major celebration in London of the 50th anniversary, and we want every congregation who has one, make a poster. And on the poster, you can have pictures of people and pictures of your scroll, and we'll put the posters up in London, and we'll have this tremendous celebration. And I said to myself, wow, that's great. Let's do that. Let's be part of it. And I thought at the time that our scroll came from a city called Pakov, P-A-C-O-V, and that's how I pronounced it. So I said, maybe, just maybe, there's something about that city somewhere. So I started doing some research on the internet, and also one of the religious school classes, the 7th graders, were doing a unit on the Holocaust, and they were helping us. So I typed in, P-A-C-O-V, And I was astonished how much there was. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. had movies, home movies of Jews who were from Patzov taken in the 1930s. It was astonishing. Then at services, I said, I have this article, it's about 6-7 pages long, it's in Czech. I don't know anybody who knows Czech, maybe somebody might help me. Remember, the congregation comes forward and says, I know someone who knows Czech. She hand wrote out a translation. So that was one stage. Then one day, after services, I see two people standing by the Torah. The woman said, I'm a doctor, and my mother was from the Czech Republic, was sent to a camp and survived the death march at the end of the war. And so I was able to translate the 8 or 9 page article, The Histories of the Jews of Patzov. It was a small community, at most a couple of hundred. But they built a synagogue. They had services there. They thrived. They did very well with their neighbors for the most part. It's an aspect of Jewish history, and then the Nazis murdered them and destroyed it. They deserve to be remembered. And I only wish we had more sources that we could speak about and recall who they were, what their lives were like. Otherwise, the lives and the people would just be totally lost.
Whether read from the Bima or in the light of a memorial display, each scroll brings powerful messages to its congregation.
Number one, they said that picture is worth 1,000 words. And the reality is that anybody who walk in this place, the largest crowd, like in every congregation, is the Yomim Tovim, is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim. You walk in, you right away recognize the Torah scroll. When you have a break, when you have an event, you have other life cycle events, you see it. As a teacher in our school, I always make the business from time to time to take the children and show them the two locations of the Torah scrolls that are given to us, because we have some of our congregants who either survivors or children of survivors. The subject of the Shoah comes up relatively often. And from time to time, we incorporated the story of the very emotional and special Sifrei Torah that was given to us.
In the Talmud, there is a phrase, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Lezeh. All of the people of Israel are responsible for one another. And this Torah is one of the ways that we hold on to that responsibility. We hold on to the responsibility of telling the story of a community people might not know about, and remembering that the Holocaust isn't just about what happened in concentration camps, but it also happened in homes and in villages that were beloved to people for many years. And so we take that responsibility incredibly seriously when we provide our safe home to this Torah today.
When I first came into this sanctuary 2 years ago, I saw the quote that is on the plaque above our display case, Halo zeh ud mutzal me'esh. And I wasn't familiar with the verse. Hello, behold, zeh, this, ud, and I had not remembered the meaning of that word. Mutzal, saved, me'esh, from the fire. And here we have the translation, saved from the midst of the fire. And I went to a biblical dictionary and I looked up, the word ud means ember. It means a stick for a fire. And I had chills when I read this, right? That this Sefer Torah, this Torah scroll, could have been kindling from an actual fire. And it wasn't. This is a quote from the 3rd chapter, verse 2 of the book of Zechariah. And we read this in the Haftarah, in the selection from the books of the prophets, on the Shabbat of Chanukah, on the Shabbat of rededication of the temple. Behold, this was saved from being a twig in the fire. And isn't that the representation of everything we are doing here as a community in the world after the Shoah?
over the years that, people have referred to the fact that we've got this special Patsov scroll. I knew about them from a very young age because my father actually was on an academic conference in the Czechoslovakia. And so I knew about the Czech scrolls from when I was a child. So I was fascinated when I came to Milton Keynes to hear about them.
Yeah.
And actually see one in person.
Yeah,
It's lovely.
Yeah. It's an honor to have this scroll. It represents a community who have perished. And every time we look at it, we can think of all those people who died.
You're immediately reminded that there was a sort of other life that was taken away by the Nazis. It was such a different community and a different life to what we have now. And I think that's what it reminds me of.
We know the names of these people, and it just brings it home. They're like part of our community. They're our ancestors, and we can say Kaddish for them, and we can mourn their death because their relatives aren't around to do it.
This scroll is them being with us.
The scrolls still live in Jewish communities, and Jewish communities still thrive.
And Patsov lives on here.
So my family is not Jewish, but we come from this region for hundreds of years. So we come here every summer, and I have never come across any stories or history of the Jewish people who then later on I realized that they lived in this part of the country. And I was only when my great aunt, who is also from here and who I liked very much, when she was an old lady in her 80s, she started to remember her youth like people do in their old age. And so she was talking about the classmates and the friends she had when she was at school, when she was a teenager. She was about 10, 12 years old. And she mentioned some names. And she mentioned one specific name, which was the name of Lenka or Eleonora Teller. And she referred to her, she said this was somebody, a very beautiful girl, and I really liked her very much. And she had no idea what happened to her. She knew that in 1942, she disappeared. And I became curious, and I wanted to find out for my great aunt, who was at the end of her life, what happened to this friend of hers, and could I find any records, could I find any photographs? So I did a little bit of research, and then by stroke of luck I found somebody who actually was a cousin of this Lenka and who survived, and so I was able to find some records, and I was able to find a photograph. And it was a tragic story, like many or most of the stories, that she died in 1942 in Belarus in Malý Trostinec. So this was the very beginning of the story when I thought, okay, somebody a couple of days ago referred to a dagger of guilt. So this was kind of my dagger of guilt. I felt, here I am. I thought I knew everything about this region, but I didn't. I didn't know anything about this Jewish history here. And so I said, oh, I want to learn. I want to learn really what this was. So I started doing some research and looking into the archive and trying to find the people and possibly find some of the survivors. And we decided we will do also something about the heritage here, which was principally the synagogue and the rabbi's house, which were unused, which were ruined, which were in a very bad shape. So we created an association, and we are trying now to renovate these sites, these heritage sites, but not only to renovate the sites, but what we also want is to revive and keep the memory alive of the people, the Jews from Patsov and from the region, so that they're not forgotten and that we keep the memory also for the future generations.
It began with a woman's memory of being a young girl whose friend one day disappeared and was never seen again. Sometimes this is all that it takes. So go the efforts of Tikkun Patsov, an organization established to purchase and save this remarkable space by securing the structure, replacing the roof, and ensuring the Patsov synagogue was placed on the heritage list of the Czech Republic in 2020. The much bigger task of restoring the building is an effort that continues, all in the memory of the people who once worshipped here. Not only will their lives be celebrated, but ideas will be shared, art will be experienced, and a message of love and tolerance and hope will now radiate from these windows.
And the idea of Mechaye Meitim, right, of the concept from our tradition of resurrecting that which is dead, whether literally or metaphorically, in memory of those in Patsov and the other communities in that area, certainly in their memory, as well as the idea of we have been blessed to live on. You know, it's when we observe Yom HaShoah, it's Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura. We came through it, the triumph eventually on the other side.
There were people who held that Torah. There were people who read from that Torah. They held that at one time. And now, and what they went through, and those who saved these Torahs, what they went through to save them. But you have to show people, the faces of these people, faces of the Czechoslovakian people who were involved with saving these Torahs, who went through so much because they were Jew and never gave up their Jewishness.
Our religion is life, if it's anything at all. But at some juncture, these things have to be remembered. How you do it is up to each generation, but it has to be done.
Discoveries are occurring every day, and the local community begins to feel a sense of renewed interest.
Pro mě osobně je to takový kontakty s vlastní minulostí, protože můj praděda byl městským úředníkem a dříve pracoval v advokátní kanceláři macovského žida pana Wardheimera a mně se zachovaly taky vlastně drobné dokumenty této činnosti a je to takový prostup i rodinný a na závěru tomu vlastně vzhledem k té tragédii té první poloviny 20. století se naše společnost Archea Brna rozhodla udělat tento výzkum zdarma.
That the community of Patsov, their Torah, supports our Torah.
Incredibly special to have this Torah here. I think we're very fortunate, the only synagogue in Northern California that has a Czech Torah from Patsov. I think it's quite meaningful.
Think of the effort that group of just a couple of hundred people put into to build that synagogue, to maintain that Jewish community, and it was then gone. We owe the past a way of remembering them, and again, especially today, we owe the present and the future the memory of those Jews and those communities. We have the opportunity to prevent that from happening for the Jews of Patsov.
It has been a significant part of the life of our congregation and our understanding of ourselves and our obligations to bring life to the words of that Torah that come to us from a community that was destroyed.
So when I think of the Torah from Patsov, I really think about how grateful I am that this Torah is still alive in many ways and that we are still alive, and we sang Am Yisrael Chai, and this Torah is living proof.
When a community remembers and celebrates its past, it is destined for a positive future. There are many faces, many families, many stories, and many journeys interwoven in this space. The ties that now connect this small community to communities around the world are many. And if followed, each thread returns to this sacred space.
part of this important initiative. And in a moment, we will actually get to hear from the wonderful documentarian who helped put together this work, as well as Karen Koblitz, who is also who has family ties to Patsov and also was instrumental in putting together this documentary and part of Tikkun Patsov, which is the organization that sponsored it. While we take just one moment to do some setup, I encourage you to turn to the person next to you, a person next to you, or behind you, or in front of you, and share with them one thing that stood out to you or that you learned from this documentary. And we'll come back together shortly.
So it is my pleasure. I'm glad everyone is chatting and sharing. It's really wonderful. And we can do more of that. But it really is my honor to introduce two very important people. Dale Bloomstein, who is actually in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So
Yep.
He's with us via Zoom. And Karen Koblitz, who is here, who lives in Los Angeles. And her relatives, her great-great-grandmother was from Patsov. And so she has taken a great interest in restoring and is part of Tikkun Patsov. And so we're really honored to have both Dale and Karen here with us tonight. Dale is going to speak first for a few minutes, and then Karen will speak. And we have a couple questions for them, but if you have one burning question, we probably will have a little bit of time for that. So Dale?
Well, hello. First, I'll do a little bit of sound check because we haven't really had a chance to sound. I hope if anybody can hear me, just give me a thumbs up and we'll go, oh, goody. Okay, well, it's really wonderful to be with all of you tonight. And quick note to self, and I bet Karen is probably laughing to herself too. We have to make a note to put the credits a little bit earlier on because they never seem to play. When we were in Patsov in November, a beautiful little theater that they were playing the film, halfway through the credits, they kind of went out. So anyway, well, lesson learned there. But again, it's great to be with you all. Thank you. Sharon, you had kind of posed a question to me as my assignment tonight, maybe to ask a little bit about what I learned making the film. And I guess I'd actually reposition that a little bit, only in that I have been learning about the scrolls and this whole story. It's been a process, probably about 15 years now. And just when I think I know everything there is to know, or most everything, there's another facet, another ripple that presents itself to me. So it's been kind of an ongoing learning experience for me. And the idea that there's, to talk just about Patsov, and here I'll do a shameless plug for another project I'm working on. It was Karen and I worked on this one, which was kind of a subset of a larger topic of the entire story of the scrolls. Obviously, Patsov is just one of them. And it's entitled 1,564 Stories. The title having a little of irony there is that you will never be able to really tell every single facet of every person, of every community, of every Torah scroll. It's too big. But in this case, we were able to tell that one story. But I guess to give you an answer of what I learned, I'm going to reposition that a little bit of what really moved me, what was really profoundly affected me. And you met Pavel in the film, the gentleman who really kind of started this all, who's working with Karen in restoring the synagogue. I was surprised. It was a revelation to me that Pavel is not Jewish. He has no Jewish roots. This was a matter of him having been growing up in the community. It was, again, as he described it, this stabbing of conscience, and that his family, years, generations after this all happened, there is this renewed need to remember and honor and save the story. And he, a lot of people, as Karen will probably tell you about in a short while, doing a lot of work to preserve that space as a memorial. And I was really moved by that. Obviously we're all close to it, as we just observed Yom HaShoah as Jews. But it's special to me when I encounter someone who is not Jewish, and also it means as much to them. And that was very special. And I guess the other really significant, impactful moment that I had, and there's a lot of heavy material as you try to tell this story, and often when I am filming something, when I'm shooting something in the midst of trying to cover an event, it's one thing, Rabbi and Sharon, when we had our lovely time together, our interviews, it was relatively relaxed. We could sit down there in the sanctuary, and we set up, and we were able to interview. When I was in Potsdam for the event, a lot of the footage you saw, running around trying to make sure, I'm a small crew. I'm a crew of one. So covering things like that is very, very stressful. And most of the time I'm not really experiencing it. I'm just kind of looking through my lens, hoping to capture something. But there was a moment where two times during the calendar of events that were going on for the commemoration in November, there was a Friday night service, a Shabbat service that we conducted, and Karen will help me with the name of the town. I think it was Komenitze. It was the synagogue there that was, of course, is no longer a synagogue. It was a church, but they allowed us to come in, and Rabbi Kevin Hale and a lovely man, Julius Mueller, who kind of conducted a service, a Shabbat service. And even as I was shooting, and I think a lot of the people there felt it, we realized that this was the first time a Hebrew word was uttered in that building in 80 years. And that was something that was really very powerful. And then, of course, the procession after the film that you just saw was shown in Potsdam, just about a half a block from the nice little art center they have there. That whole procession walked around the corner and into this very dark space, because there's not much there, as you can see, but all these candles kind of lit up, and carrying it was one of the Potsdam scrolls that had not been in that building for 80 years. And it's hard not to be affected by that. So those are my two takeaways, and I'll let Karen fill in the rest.
Okay, Karen.
Thank you. Hi, Dale.
Hey.
So Sharon asked that I talk about how I got involved in this project. I have been a genealogist of my family since I was young, asking a lot of questions, but I never questioned my father or my grandfather, but I knew they came from a place called Bohemia. And so I met in 2010, I was introduced to Julius Mueller, who was wonderful, and accompanied Dale to Potsdam to film in May. Some of the film was made in May of 2022 when they're working inside the synagogue, and the narrators talking about discoveries made. That was the day they unearthed the staircase into the women's gallery. And so and then went back in November. He talked about the event in November. The event in November of 2022 was the 80th anniversary of the transport of the Potsdam Jews and the Jews from the surrounding areas to Terezin and other death camps. So we had this commemorative event. And the film was screened there. We rushed to make this film, and I have to thank Dale so much for working so hard to get it done for this event. And after it was screened, we got to look at the Torah from Milton Keynes from outside of London. And then it was carried into this Potsdam synagogue, and it was blessed by Rabbi David Maxa of Prague, who was invited to come to the event and do the blessing. And so anyway, I'm connected to Potsdam because in 2014, when I went there with Julius, I met him in Prague with my husband, Alan, who's here with me. And I thought it was going to be that Henry Gates show, you know, Finding Your Roots. You sit down in a room and he opens a book and you look at the pictures. But this was before then. But anyway, before that was on TV. So he says, get in the car. And we drive to Potsdam. We drive to southern Bohemia, which is about an hour and a half south of Prague, about 50 miles. And we go to the farming community where my family is in the records in 1756 in a little town called Bradachov. And my fourth great grandfather was a shoemaker. And as the generations went, my great great grandfather was a peddler of farm products. He lived on farms and he peddled through the countryside, wool and feathers and hides. And so as Julius is taking me to all these different communities, they lived here, they lived there, because he's really good going through the archives. He takes us to Potsdam. And though my great-great-grandfather, Moses Koblitz, and what a great name Moses was, because he saved us. He brought us to America in 1873. He was in 1859, he lost his wife, my great-great-grandmother, Rosalia, and he had like 7 children. And in 1860, in the Potsdam synagogue, he married Johanna Meller. And Meller was a name that came up on the screen because the Mellers had lived for a long, long time in Potsdam. And so I looked at this beautiful synagogue and I said, oh my God, what a shame. It was used since World War II for storage. And at the time in 2014, it was owned by a gentleman that owned a hardware store, and he kept his collection of antique cars in the synagogue. That's what it was there. That was what it was used for. And so this was 2014. I also made contact with Rabbi Roth in 2014. So I got this idea at that time to contact all of the synagogues with Torah scrolls from Potsdam. And so I've been in touch. Most of them have kept in touch with me and responded to me. And when we had this 80th anniversary of the transport, I had this idea, all the synagogues with the Potsdam scrolls will travel to Potsdam and they'll bring us their scroll with the rabbi or a few members of the congregation. Will have this really wonderful reunion. Well, because of COVID, because of, the financial environment in this world is kind of up and down. Everybody said, what a great idea, but none of the congregations said they would be able to come. So I had this epiphany that I would bring the congregations with the Torah scrolls to Potsdam for the 80th anniversary celebration. And that's when I talked to a friend of mine, Susie Boyer, who lives near me in Los Angeles. I was introduced to her back in 2014. She works for the Memorial Scrolls Trust in London. And I was talking to her and she said, there's this great filmmaker, Dale Bloomstein. So she gave me Dale's information. I watched his films. He's done a number of films on the Jews of the Midwest. And his most recent one is about delis, the history of delis in Minneapolis. It's fantastic. So anyway, Dale and I started, communicating. I was able to get a grant from the American Embassy in Prague towards this film. And also, I'm a retired faculty professor emerita from the University of Southern California and very active in the Emeriti Center. And they also gave money towards making this film. So that's how the film came about. And I was involved in it. You know, that my great-great-grandfather was married in the synagogue meant a lot to me. And as you can see from the photos we have, every August, they started this about in 2019, or at least Tikkun Potsov's been involved. Every second Sunday of the year, they have Czech Jewish Heritage Day, and Jewish heritage sites are open. Well, the synagogue is not open to anyone yet. We're still working on it. And so we open it up for Czech Jewish Heritage Day, for the 80th anniversary of the transport, and people are interested. One of the Viera Lederova, Kolarjova, that's the first family that was talked about. Viera survived the Holocaust. She escaped on the march, the Bergen-Belsen March, with a few friends. And she came back to Potsdam. Her husband lived after the war also. And they lived in Potsdam for a small time. And then the communists came in and it was just unbearable. And so they moved to Prague and they changed their last name to Kolarz. And that was the name that someone gave her when she went back to Czechoslovakia after she escaped, because her father had helped a Christian family and they helped her. They gave her a new identity and she was able to survive. So as we keep having events, eventually when we restore the synagogue, we will have a museum that will have photographs and stories and films of the former Jewish community to never forget. But we also want to make it a cultural and heritage center and have some kind of connection to the residents that live there today, because there are no Jews there today. And as we keep working on things, I meet more and more people. And Bruce Knoth, Bruce, are you here still? Can you stand? Bruce's grandfather was born and raised in Potsdam, and I didn't meet him nor his sister Audrey till I think in January I was contacted by them. And so, you know, through this history, and I guess you don't mind me sharing with everyone, last Thanksgiving, Bruce and Audrey discovered that their grandfather, who was Joseph Robotchek, was Jewish. He never knew that he was Jewish. So Joseph and his wife had escaped early as the Nazis occupied Czechoslovakia and went through Belgium. And there's a whole story, which I hope we will have in the synagogue when it's restored, about how their family made it to America and ended up in Cleveland. So yes. Yes. And so, okay. So in the film, we have Peter Dufek, the archaeologist, unearthing the staircase. His grandfather, he talked about, worked for a Jewish lawyer. And after the war, his grandfather, you know, the lawyer perished. He kept all the papers of the people that who had been in contact, used this lawyer. And in those papers, there is a letter from Bruce's grandfather, Joseph, that was mailed back to Potsdam, asking how his mother was. Did she survive the war? Cecilia, right? Yeah, Cecilia Robotchak. And she didn't. So it's very sad, but you know, it's wonderful now to have this relationship. And right now, Audrey is on her way to Brussels to meet with Pavel, who lives in Brussels and works for the EU. And that's where the family first escaped from Czechoslovakia to Brussels. His grandmother is Catholic, so it helped, intermarriage helped Jews at the beginning of the war to be able to live a little longer and probably escape with his mother. His mother also was a child. Thank you.
Karen, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
But you brought up something. I'd be remiss if not mentioning also Susie Boyer in LA, because Susie was my very first call in 2008 when I first heard the story of the scrolls. Quick aside, I became interested because of my synagogue here in Minneapolis, or suburb of Minneapolis, Beth Shalom congregation. Ours was behind glass, and I was talking to our rabbi, and my rabbi enthralled me with the story that these scrolls were collected by the Nazis. They were going to be part of a museum in Grace. The Allies found them. They sent them to. It was just this incredible story that I started doing some research on. And by the way, I tell this story with his full permission, Rabbi Norman Cohen. I went to start researching it because I knew a little bit about World War II history, not a lot, but I knew a little. I had never heard that story. And the first thing I found as I was searching online was the myth of the Museum to an Extinct Race. And I thought, what am I reading here? Is this somebody denying? Is this a denier? No, it was the person who actually worked, the volunteer research person for the Memorial Scrolls Trust, who basically was putting out the information. Was the story of the myth is a little bit distorted. And again, for a much longer conversation than we have tonight, but my quest then became, I want to tell the story of the real heroes, and those were the Jews in Prague during the war who helped save the scrolls. Anyway, an aside, my very first call was to Susie Boyer, and she was the one who helped me at the very beginning, and she's the reason I'm doing this today. And one more correction, Karen, she's a volunteer. She does not work for them. She has never taken a dime from the trust. Anyway, I want to say that, and I hope she's watching because she's amazing.
Can you talk about, Sonia, can both of you, well, Dale, you did this a little bit. Karen, can you talk about what's moved you the most about this whole project, the whole process, or even when you were in Patsov?
I think there's a number of things that have moved me greatly. My idea for the film, I came to Dale, we talked about it, was to really talk about these survivors, these Torah scrolls, as each rabbi and family involved in congregations talked about in the film, how the meaning of these Torah scrolls still today. I mean, Sharon talks about a legacy in her family where her parents, her mother brought the scroll to Beth Torah in memory of her father. And then her children were bar and bat mitzvah using the scroll. Now her grandson. I mean, that's what the scroll did back in Czechoslovakia or Bohemia before that, because I don't know the dates of some of these scrolls. There are people that can date them, but the community in Potsdam comes from the mid 16th century. So, starting out in homes. That synagogue was built in 1828. So, and the thing that when I started watching the film, when Dale completed it and sent it to me, and Rabbi Krantz is talking about the scroll and how it arrived, and it was in this big package and all, and then he wipes a tear from his eye, and I go, oh my God, Dale got it. That hit the nail on the head, And we just can't forget all these communities and these people, because someone has to remember them. And we are so fortunate. Pavel and I became connected in 2015. And then Michael Arend, another person whose family came from near Potsdam, has also been instrumental from the beginning. So there's really like the three of us working on this, trying to get things moving. Pavel really does a lot of groundwork in the EU. I mean, he worked in the Czech Republic with immigrants. So that's his background, why he feels for people, why he's so interested in the Jewish community. And so actually I love Susie to death, but when I told her what I wanted to do in 2014, when I met her coming back from Potsdam, I am going to get this synagogue restored. She goes, That's so lovely, but it'll never happen. Ah. So, I mean, I just think in showing the film and speaking to people like all of you, thank you all for being here. And the more people I meet through this project, it's just wonderful. It's so rewarding.
We have time for one question. Only one. Someone have a question or a comment?
The next step is we've raised most of the money. The three of us, Michael, Pavel, and myself, bought the synagogue. And what we ended up doing was, instead of buying the synagogue, we had to buy Mr. Chavenka a new building to put his cars in. And it was a process that was unbelievable because he had never paid a lien on the building, and there was all this legal stuff. It was such a mess. And then it took so long, and he raised the price in the end, but what were we going to do? It's to finish it. We've gotten a lot of money through grants, but now with what's happening in Ukraine, and rightly so, a lot of European money is going to helping Ukrainians as they move into Europe and try to settle themselves. So it gets harder and harder. You know, we just kind of do it piecemeal, but every year we have programming and we learn about more people. 180 people filled the auditorium in Potsdam to hear. That was a thought that I lost a while ago when I was talking about Vera Ledererova Kojarova. When her testimony, she made a testimony, you know, the Shoah Foundation at USC in Los Angeles has testimonies of people surviving not only the Shoah, but also other tragedies in the world. And so her testimony is part of their collection. And we showed a film with her testimony at this event, and 180 people came to see it. There were 30 of us that had come to Potsdam for the commemorative event. But that means that 150 people from that area, not Jewish, were interested in listening to her story. So there is interest in there. We bought the rabbi's house in 2022, which we hope to restore. It had a shul, a mikveh, and a kosher kitchen. One of the things I would like to see happen, because my background is in the arts, is to have Jewish artists come and stay in that building and do activities that involve the community, so that they meet Jewish artists of various media and have interaction. I'd love to see something happen with Zoom between the people of Potsdam and the congregation here. I mean, I don't know. I was thinking, oh, I'm a knitter, you know. Oh, maybe but nobody knits there. But maybe there could be a cooking class or something, you know. I just think it would be lovely to have communication with a community that no longer exists and have some kind of new relationship come to happen.
Well, I want to thank Dale and Karen for sharing their stories with us and including us in the documentary. And it's just been a great experience. And I think the beginning of a wonderful relationship.
I agree.
So,
thank you so much
Indeed.
for having me.
Rabbi Zoe,
I'm right here.
Oh,
Surprise.
Surprise.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dale Bluestein and to Karen Koblitz for sharing their incredible work, this holy work of telling stories that could have been lost, that were lost for so many years, and to support their efforts yearly. As part of our Yom HaShoah gathering, we collect a goodwill offering to support some kind of organization. And this year, the organization that we've chosen is Tikkun Patsov. So as you, before you head out, you'll see our beautiful tzedakah box, and you'll see a blue sign on it that says donations to Tikkun Patzov here. So please, if you have the capability, we would love to have your contribution and what we will send. So we are so grateful to the work that you guys are doing. So before we conclude, we have a few people of note that we just want to give special thanks to those who were part of the Yom HaShoah planning committee. If you could please rise so we can give our thanks to you. Thank you so much. This could not have happened without each and every one of you. We also are joined by Vice Mayor Teresa Cox. We're so grateful for her presence. Thank you for being here and for all of the support that you've given to our community. And thank you to each and every one of you for being in this room, for helping us to do the holy work of remembering. So this is where our time together, multi-access style, is going to come to a conclusion. For our friends on Zoom, I hope that you have a meaningful rest of your evening and a meaningful week this upcoming week. And for those who are in person, as advertised, we are going to have a couple different opportunities for you to explore further in a less formal setting. So there are two options that will take place. There will be a tour of our Czech Torah from Patzov that is going to be here, as well as all of the documents that we have about how the Torah came to us that you are more than welcome to take a look through. And we also have refreshments, which you are more than welcome. We encourage you. There's lots of food, so I hope that you will take at least one bite. The one thing that we ask is that the food stay on the social hall side and the Torah stay on this side. It's a Jewish practice that we're not, trying to get schmutz all over the Torah. Yeah, no Torah schmutz. It's a good rule. So if you'll give me just 1.5 minutes or so. So if you want to just schmooze with the people around you. For the people on Zoom, we wish you a good rest of your evening. And for the people in person, if you want to start grabbing snacks, feel free to do so. If you want to come over towards the Torah, give about a minute or two as we set up, and then we'll be ready for you.